Hytale's release gets closer and closer every day, and with every day that passes, we're getting exponentially more news, content, and information. Today alone, and the script is being written on January 8th, we've seen an official Hytale cinematic using the in-game machinima tool, a whole bunch of different tweets from multiple developers plus Simon himself, a ridiculous amount of short gameplay clips from a small handful of modders that were given access to the game early to make day one mods, and last but not least, a lore blog post. And that's just the stuff from when I wrote this script. It's 2 days later as of recording it, and there's twice as much stuff. Man, I don't know how news channels end up with 10 to 20 minute videos for every single subject. I just did all that in one paragraph. That was a joke in case it wasn't obvious. Keeping up with every single new piece of information alone is actually giving me a headache. So what I'm gonna do here instead is look at just one piece of information. And by look at, I mean use a small piece of it to segue into something we have very little information on, because I think that's more interesting to talk about. And that one piece of information is the blog post, which is a lore blog post. As per usual, I'm not going to read the blog post to you. You can read it yourself on Hytale's website or find a news channel to read it for you. But to be honest, 50% of what it talks about is stuff you could already assume through common sense, like how the game's concept art is just concept art, and that you shouldn't use it as a baseline for expectations about what's in the game. And if you've played any fully complete game and then looked back at the concept art, they can look like two entirely different games. I mean, just look at this picture. Want to know what game this concept art is for? Destiny. I'm not saying you shouldn't read the blog post, because they do talk about their philosophy for how they want to do the lore and all that good stuff, but there's not any super big groundbreaking information, which is honestly fine by me, because finding secret pieces of lore as a community is always a good time. Plus, they even say right at the start of the blog, this blog post will not contain any new specifics about the lore or narrative itself. The most important piece of information we do get from this blog is how the lore and story will unfold for us in early access. We already know that there's currently no quests or super big main narrative, excluding something that I'll talk about later in the video, since the devs have more important things to worry about, like making the game actually be a cohesive experience. So all the lore that we'll be getting on launch will be from structures, items, and objects. The blog calls this method of storytelling archaeology, which allows them to tell stories from different perspectives. But since there's already dinosaurs in the game, and I don't want to confuse anyone, I'm going to refer to it with the blanket term of world building, or in this very specific case, passive world building. If you're not clear on exactly what passive world building looks like or what it means, let me show you an example or two. I'm sure most of you have at least heard of the game Dark Souls, which is made by From Software. From Software and all their Souls-like games tell pretty much 95% of their stories and lore using passive world building. What this means in Dark Souls' case is that in the description of pretty much every single item is either one fact, one quote, or one perspective of or about something. I know something is incredibly vague, but it could be about literally anything in that item description, and in any chronological order as well, while sometimes not even giving every relevant detail of whatever it's talking about. Now, if you've never played one of From Software's games, you might call this lazy, saying that they're just doing it this way so they don't have to show the player a cohesive and direct story. But it's actually intentionally done this way. When Miyazaki, who's the game director for most of the games, was a little kid, he loved to read. But when he was first learning to read, he'd find some part in a book or story that he couldn't understand, which led him to fill in the blanks of the story with his own interpretation, using his imagination and maybe a relevant picture in the book. He enjoyed doing this so much that he wanted to share the experience with people who play his games, and give them the feeling of writing the story alongside the creator. Now, admittedly, it is a lot of work, and I mean a lot of work, to put all the puzzle pieces together and then also fill in the empty spaces, but luckily there's people on YouTube who've done all the hard work for us, and the stories that they do find are beautiful. If you're interested in seeing what I mean, might I suggest Vati Vidya and his Prepare to Cry videos, which are totally not sad at all. I don't know why you'd ever come to that conclusion. The other form of passive world building is from environmental storytelling. This is when you can interpret some sort of story just from looking around an area. You might see skeletons in certain positions or specific objects knocked over, moved around, or destroyed. Bethesda has done this so much in their games that it's resulted in the funny environmental storytelling skeleton meme. But even outside of the memes and purely comedic environmental storytelling, Bethesda utilizes this a lot. I feel like they have just one guy whose only job is to go from location to location, setting up all sorts of props to tell his own little unwritten stories. One of the biggest examples of this is in Skyrim. As you follow the game's main quest, eventually you'll end up in a location called Ulfdand. This is an infamously long dungeon that takes you all the way to the game's underground area called Blackreach. And littered all over this dungeon are over a dozen aspects of environmental storytelling that follow the unfortunate fate of the Ulfdand expedition. This is a group of explorers that originally went into the ruins of the dungeon to get rich, but then got trapped inside by a blizzard where they eventually ran out of food and supplies. Some of them went insane from obsessing over finding treasure, and another guy went crazy from drugs. Many of them died from the dungeon's inhabitants and traps, and only 2 made it to the end, where they proceeded to fight each other to the death over their greed. And while there are 3 NPCs with dialogue, if you don't pick up on the environmental storytelling by reading journals, inspecting corpses, or keeping an eye out for all the bloodstains, you'd have no idea what these people are talking about or why they're even here. And that's just one of 100 examples of environmental storytelling in Skyrim alone. So it's stuff akin to the examples I just gave that will be how we get pretty much any lore-related info right at launch. And obviously, since the devs barely have any story set in stone, and probably haven't even begun writing some sort of main storyline, the information that we will be able to find immediately at launch is probably going to be very vague information about faction culture and history, magic, and maybe small pieces of the past history of Orbis and why it's fragmented. So do not expect anything on par with the examples I gave, because those are incomplete games. Hytale isn't even remotely close to what you'd call complete. But speaking of fragmented Orbis, I did mention earlier in the video that I would talk more about the small exception to there not being a big main narrative to the game. But before I do, if you've made it this far through the video and are enjoying, or especially if this is the 2nd or 3rd video of mine you've seen, because I know there's thousands of you, then consider subscribing. It would mean a lot. Now, what does a fragmented Orbis have to do with a maybe, possibly, almost storyline? Well, if you saw my last video on Hytale's World Gen, or just read the blog post about it, then you know that when you play the game in exploration mode, which is basically just survival mode for all you Minecraft players out there, you will be able to open up gateways into places called Echoes of Orbis. Outside of any story-related stuff, doing this allows you to very briefly take a look around an area made by Hytale's V2 World Gen before they've completely finished it and put it into the main game, replacing the current World Gen. Which is cool and all, but what they're doing with this is also including the fact that the game's early access and inevitable bugs and glitches are part of the actual lore. Now back to the current blog post, it says that while there's no grand narrative, there is still a narrative, one intended for players to piece together as they play through the exploration mode, one that ties into the transition from World Gen V1 to V2. Perhaps the term Cursebreaker will ring some sort of bell. Now, if you've somehow never heard of or seen the term Cursebreaker, then you probably haven't bought the game yet, because it's the pricier Founders Edition version of the game that people can buy if they want to help support the devs. And if you use code FRIDGE when buying it, or any other version, or even upgrading versions, then it helps support my channel as well. But yeah, now we know why the Founders Edition is named the way it is. It's because of the beginning of the game's narrative. So using context clues, we can theorize that Orbis has somehow been cursed and fragmented, and it will be part of our job as Cursebreakers to go into the Echoes of Orbis in order to do something. That part we don't know yet. But we do know that the end result of us doing this, as far as the story is concerned, will be the implementation of World Gen V2 as the main world generator, thus restoring Orbis to its former glory. In fact, we'll probably even be told or guided towards doing this right as we create a new world, because we know from Simon, via Canadian Flash, that we don't start our journey in Orbis. The biggest theory people have is that we'll either start the game in the Temple of Gaia, or, and I think this is much more likely given the name and how new the information is, this forgotten temple, which is in a place called Edge of the Echo. Something in here will most likely tell us to go out and break Orbis's curse by entering the echoes of Orbis. But hey, that's just a theory. A Hytale theory. Thanks for watching. Wait, no, don't go. The video's not over yet. We're getting there, but not yet. I just want to remind everyone one last time, the game is going to be in the very beginning stages of early access, so we should all keep our expectations very low. Not only so that we don't get disappointed by the fact that there's probably very little substance to the game right now, but also so that we can be pleasantly surprised by things we might not have even expected to be in the game in the first place. The fact that they're making the game's development part of the story is a very creative idea that'll help make the people who were here from the very beginning feel like they're part of the story too. That also means that as the game develops, we'll be able to experience the story and the lore as it unfolds, maybe even playing a part in the direction it goes from time to time, much like a live service game. Unlike a live service game, however, you'll be able to experience the entire existing story whenever you want, and won't even have to pay $100 every year to see it all. But anyways, this video's getting long and my voice is dying, so I'm gonna stop yapping here. This is probably the last video I'm gonna make before the game comes out, but don't quote me on that because I might get some idea depending on the information we've been drowning in for the past few days. But I'll absolutely be making content once the game comes out. What type of content? I don't know yet. I've been improvising this whole time. Don't forget to click the like button if you enjoyed, and thanks for watching all the way to the end. See ya.